Hello and welcome to Neuroshambles, the podcast that aims to shine a light into some of the murkier corners of what it's like to parent neurodivergent kids. I'm Mark Allen, and every episode I'm going to be swapping stories with my guests about some of the frankly ludicrous nonsense we have to deal with on a daily basis. So, if you're anything like me and you're feeling frazzled, overwhelmed and pretty much an outcast from polite society, join me. Hello and welcome to episode 29 of Neuroshambles. As ever, it is a joy to have you aboard, Neuroshamblers. Thank you so much for bearing with me while I took a month off for the Christmas and New Year period. Just needed to kind of hunker down and get through it because it is a pretty turbulent time of the year, which also involved me being ill for pretty much all of it. So that wasn't much fun, but here we are. I've got a really great show lined up where I'm going to be talking to one of the guests that we had on season 1, which is really fun to have her back. And we've got a really interesting topic of the week this week. We'll also be looking at some more neurodiversity champions, some tiny epic wins, and some what the flip moments. So what are we waiting for? Let's launch into it.
Meet the guest.
This week's guest is someone who I chatted to relatively early on in season 1 of Neuroshambles, and I'm so glad she's agreed to return for another fun, animated, and no doubt quite sweary chat with me. She is an author, an advocate, an activist, and a public speaker who supports parents navigating the knotty world of education otherwise than at school. It is a warm welcome back to the tremendous Heidi Mavir. How are you doing, Heidi?
Hello, and you pronounced my name right as well.
I always do, I think.
Start to the year. Someone pronouncing my name correctly. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So, obviously, we talked a while back now. Probably worth reminding people of your neuroshambolic setup there.
It's fucking shambolic.
Obviously, that's why you're on.
I have a house, and up until September of 2024, I shared it with my son Theo, and his dog, and our cat, and his tortoise.
Right.
But in September, he went to university, and he took the dog with him. So right. I am now a single mom to a cat and a tortoise. He is autistic ADHD, as am I. And also some other kind of like funky variations on the theme of neurodivergence. He has a tic disorder. We both probably have Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. He's probably dyslexic. I've probably got a personality disorder. So, you know.
No, you've just got a personality, Heidi. That's the big difference.
I mean, it's one of those things that I was like diagnosed with lots of things before I got diagnosed with autism and ADHD. So some days it feels like those are accurate, and other days it feels like, oh, it was just that you didn't spot the autism and ADHD.
You're just collecting them like badges in the Scouts, right?
Yeah. Kind of what I am known for, if that's not a really wanky thing to say, is that I wrote a book about our experience of Theo not being able to go to school.
It's not wanky at all. It's a fantastic book.
Thanks. Called Your Child Is Not Broken, Parent Your Neurodivergent Child Without Losing Your Marbles. And it was a book about our experience of him not being able to go to school anymore, and the process of realising and uncovering our neurodivergence, getting diagnoses and not, and navigating the education system. So that all happened when he was 15. He's now 20. He was diagnosed autistic ADHD when he was 16, and I was diagnosed autistic ADHD when I was 47.
Right, okay.
So, yeah, that's us.
Excellent.
Neuroshambolic as F.
But owning it, which is the joy of it. Anyway, thanks for reintroducing me to your setup. And yeah, let's crack on with the topic of the week because I'm really interested in this one.
What's the topic of the week?
So in the previous episode that I recorded with Heidi back in season 1, which I think it was episode 7, she made a comment about how the commonly held belief that neurodivergent humans don't feel empathy is actually bullshit, I believe was the term you used. And at the time, we sort of discussed it a little bit. We moved on pretty quickly, but it's genuinely stuck with me for quite a long time of how true that is or not. Because particularly when I look at Jay, who doesn't appear to show any modicum of empathy ever. I sort of started processing it and thinking about it a lot. And so when we were looking at a list of potential topics for this episode, I wanted to bring us back to the subject of empathy and take a deeper dive into it to understand it a bit more, and to see to what extent our neurodivergent kids are able to exhibit it. And it has been quite interesting because I thought I knew what empathy was. It's one of those things that you just assume you know what it is. But when I started trying to define it, it sort of became a bit sort of
quite slippery, isn't it?
It is a slippery one because I think you get mixed up with sympathy and empathy, right? So it's worth sort of making the distinction between those two. So sympathy is when you feel pity for someone else's misfortune or circumstances, but crucially that you feel it from your perspective. Whereas empathy is interpreting, understanding and acting on other people's emotions, but notably the ability to understand it from their viewpoint and put yourself in their shoes. So, for example, let's say someone has an ice cream and they drop it and they were really looking forward to it. Sympathy is going, yeah, that sucks that you dropped your ice cream. Empathy is saying, I bet you were really looking forward to that and you're probably feeling quite sad now. That must be quite upsetting for you. And there's a very different thing. And I decided to see to what extent Jay was aware of what empathy was. And I said, what is empathy, Jay? And his response was, something I don't have. If someone gets shot in the knee, that's not my problem.
He's not wrong.
I mean, he's not.
Unless he was the person pulling the trigger, then it maybe is.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, then you need to run. But I mean, I think, of all the things that I read about empathy, that sort of was a very succinct description of something that he definitely doesn't have.
Yeah.
It's not his problem. I get it. It makes perfect sense.
I think it's really interesting because, to be all, nerdy about it, obviously, first thing I did was check the dictionary definition.
Oh, yeah. What does the dictionary say?
The dictionary definition of empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another.
Yes. Okay.
So it comes from the Greek origin, em for in and pathos for feeling. So being able to be in the feelings of
that's
someone
interesting.
else. But the real problem I have with the whole, I think it's the generalization of particularly autistic people. Autistic people don't experience empathy. That's the generalization, the stereotype, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the reason I have such a problem with it is because I think it's so dehumanizing as a notion, because there is this thing about, what makes us different to every other creature on earth. We use tools and we express empathy, right? And so if we don't express empathy, then we're less than human. And that's why I get a bit defensive about, I think that's bullshit.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
You get me?
Yeah.
So that said, I'm with Jay. If someone's been shot in the knee, it really isn't my problem.
Yeah, where's the shooter? I need to get out of the line of fire right now. That's my primary concern.
And I think there is also that thing of this thing when you're thinking about feelings, when you're we were saying, and you said, I think that it just comes naturally to some people and not to other people. Mm-hmm. We can only go on what we experience internally ourselves, right? So I can only assume that other people experience the world the same way that I do, but there's no way of knowing that for sure. Do you know what I mean? So when we say that person doesn't experience empathy, there's genuinely no way of proving that. I mean, we can look at, do they appear to be expressing empathy for other people?
Yes.
Do they appear to be responding in a way we consider to be a commonly expressed means of showing people that you feel what they're feeling, right? But we can't ever. I just think it's the reason I'm so it's bullshit is because I think it's a really dangerous stereotype.
Yeah.
And it sort of basically says, autistic people, I'm using autistic people as an example because it generally is autistic people that get it as a label. Autistic people don't have empathy. Who else doesn't have empathy? Psychopaths, right?
Yeah.
And I'm
robots. Basically,
right? And that's why I have so much issue with it as a sweeping generalization. That said, I live with a young person who expresses feelings and empathy and sympathy and all of that stuff in quite a different way to maybe other people in his peer group and in quite a different way to I do. So I think that we can't just say that there isn't any evidence that neurodivergent people experience feelings differently. I just think it's really dangerous to be in the territory of. And there are diagnosable conditions. There is a condition, it's basically an empathy disorder, where basically you fail a number of tests and they go, you've got no empathy. And also bipolar disorder is also sometimes characterized by lacking empathy or having empathy. Those cluster B personality types. But again, we're in stereotyping and we're in the heavy depths of ableism when we're starting to decide. It's that correlation between, if we decide that someone has a particular trait, that means they're less than, because the majority of people experience the world in this way and express themselves in this way, and this batch of people over here don't. So there's something wrong with them, and that's why I have a massive issue with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we'll definitely delve into that a bit further, because I've been looking into it as well. Because again, just trying to pin it down for my own sake as well. I assumed that empathy was just a thing, just a characteristic. There are two different types of empathy that have been kind of identified. So there's cognitive empathy, which is the ability to understand what someone else is thinking or feeling based on facial expressions and tone of voice and body language and that sort of thing. And then there's emotional empathy, which is the ability to feel or share another person's emotions. So, for example, if they're distressed, you feel upset on their behalf. And they're two very different things. And all people, not just autistic people, but neurotypical people, will be able to exhibit those different types of empathy to different degrees, I guess. I feel like I have very high cognitive empathy. I'm constantly aware of people's tone of voice and people's body language and that side of things, and probably quite a lot of emotional empathy as well, because I do tend to take on other people's drama. That's not to my credit. I'm just saying that's a characteristic of me. Whereas if you look at my kids, you've got Jay, who probably does have cognitive empathy to a degree, but there's a difference between sort of understanding what someone is thinking and feeling and then giving a shit about it. So I think he probably cognitively understands it, but also doesn't really care, because it doesn't
much difference, because
doesn't affect him.
Yeah.
Whereas Otto, on the other hand, probably is the other way around. He feels people's empathy and people's emotions really keenly, and he really adopts that and kind of responds to that very well, but probably less so understands, cognitively what they're feeling, based on body language, because he's a very close talker, he's really close up, and when you sort of move away, he doesn't really take that in. He just move a bit closer. So I think that's his own characteristic. I think India's probably somewhere in the middle of all of that.
I think it's interesting as well, like there's the difference between empathy and sympathy we've dug into, but I also think that there's a massive difference between empathy and compassion.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so someone can really understand how someone else is feeling and even feel for them. Yeah. Right? In an empathetic way. But I personally, in my experience with other neurodivergent people, even people that don't appear to demonstrate high levels of empathy, hugely compassionate for the experience of the people.
So compassion, I think, is defined by wanting to do something to alleviate the feeling.
Yeah. Like
to
that
make
kind
things
of
better.
About having really intense feelings around senses of injustice, or when you were telling the story about the ice cream.
Yeah.
I've got a friend whose child has real attachments to non-organic things, right? And when you were telling the story, I was thinking, well, in their case, they wouldn't really give a shit about how the person felt about dropping their ice cream, but they would feel really sad for the ice cream.
Oh, really?
So,
that's interesting.
Like my friend always says, if my child drops a Smartie, they'll drop another one so they're not on their own.
Oh, that's a big India thing, actually.
That's really sweet.
Yeah, India does that a lot with animals and stuff.
Right? So I think one of the things when I was reading about it, one of the things that I read about empathy was that people who, regardless of their neurotype, people who display less empathy, as in not necessarily don't have it, but display it less, that's often linked to trauma. Or, and I'm going to dig into a little bit of alexithymia in a bit, but, there are reasons why people don't display empathy. For some people, it isn't safe to show how they're thinking or feeling. And so that's got to come into play. And for neurodivergent people, many of us, we don't know we're neurodivergent when we're very young. We're masking like mad. We're trying to assimilate. We're not going to display that empathy in the same way because it doesn't feel safe for us to do so. So I think there's a lot more to it than I just hate that. autistic people don't have empathy. I just think it just drives me mad. And that's
Yeah.
what I mean when I say that's bullshit.
I mean, because one of the things that I started questioning as well is, why is it seen as so important, empathy?
Why is it so
Like,
important?
why do neurotypicals, or just society in general, value empathy so greatly? And there are some apparently evolutionary kind of hangovers of if it helps to build group cohesion, which is a survival tactic because you're sort of aligning yourself with the group, and therefore you're kind of with the pack, if you like. And so that's an evolutionary tactic. And also it helps to de-escalate situations, understanding things from another person's standpoint. So I get it from that point of view.
It's a social lubricant, right?
Yeah, it's
Like
back to that,
contact.
isn't it? Yeah.
And small talk.
Yeah, and small talk. So that empathy. Yes, but it is one of these unwritten things, isn't it? That is valued highly in neurotypical circles, if you like.
It really is. And also, I don't know, like across neurotypes, I find it quite difficult to. So this is one of my things. I don't ever cry at the cinema, ever.
Right. Okay.
And like I can watch something really heartbreaking and I can feel it, but I don't express it.
And you
right?
acknowledge that it's heartbreaking, but it doesn't
Yeah,
actually.
it makes me a bit sad.
Yeah.
But I am also like, it's a film. Do you know what I mean? But I do cry at books.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
And I think that's about my processing and how I imagine things when I'm reading them.
That's really interesting because in a film, I guess you're watching actors. You know that they're actors, but in the books, those characters are you.
Internally myself. You know, I'm giving them I'm giving them faces and I'm giving them personalities and I'm maybe attaching a bit of the people I know to them. And do you know what I mean? So the exception to the rule for crying at films is on aeroplanes, but apparently that's something to do with the altitude.
Really?
Yeah.
What?
Apparently,
it just sort of
you're more
opens
likely
up the
to
tear.
cry.
Really? That's
yeah. I cried at what is that film called? Miss Congeniality. When we flew to America.
I mean, it wasn't great.
but
I wasn't moved to tears.
But I've watched Schindler's List many times, and really, I should have cried at Wicked and didn't. But that isn't about not feeling it; it's about expressing it.
Yes.
So
yeah.
That's an important distinction to make.
This is what I was kind of thinking is that if people are expressing empathy but they don't feel it, because sometimes you get that, like the neurotypicals will express empathy for someone, don't actually mean it. They just, it's the social lubricant. Is that somehow more valid than not feeling it and not expressing it?
I think it's a real insult when someone says, well, they have no empathy. Like that's up there with they're a narcissist, right? Which also gets bandied about a lot, and that annoys me. But I think that if someone, because I guess for me, right, if someone genuinely has no capacity to imagine or feel the feelings of someone else, then that person is potentially dangerous, right? That person is potentially a risk taker, a bridge burner, a tree shaker,
and not to be trusted, right?
Yeah, and I don't mean dangerous in like they might stab you in your sleep kind of way, but like in they're not going to go with the pack, they're not going to go with the herd, and they're potentially going to make a bit of trouble, And I think generally speaking, societally, we don't like those people. We don't like people who are troublemakers.
Well, if you look at that evolutionary hangover again, it's like you're not part of our tribe because you're not playing by our hidden rules.
Yeah. But also I think there's that, for me, and I don't know, I can only go on personal experience. I know this sounds really woo, and I don't mean it to sound really woo, but I do get like vibes in spaces, right? Okay. Like not in like a Ouija board way, but like if I walk into a room and someone just strikes me as a bit off, then I think I'm pretty good at picking up those. Now that's probably non-verbal signals.
This is something that I've been reading about recently. It's pattern recognition. Of going, I've been here before. I've seen these, and you're probably not aware of what it is. They just give you the ick, right?
Right.
and you pick up on that.
For a long time, I didn't trust that, and like I would ignore red flags. And now I've learned to lean into that and to trust my red flags, and they're rarely wrong, right? I would argue that that's probably empathy in action. Do you know what I mean? Like that's being able to understand that someone is not aligned with you and that someone's having feelings or experiences or whatever it might be. You're able to pick up on that. You're able to identify what it is that's going on for them, whether that's
Yeah.
recognition or something else, and you're able to go, oh no, not for me, thanks very much. From speaking to other neurodivergent people, I think that's a common experience, that we get that, oh, they give me the ick. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, why is that less valuable than being able to tell someone that you understand how terrible they must feel that they've not got their ice cream?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The thing that I found really interesting is the double empathy problem. Have you
Oh, I love
heard
this.
the double empathy problem? Is fascinating.
Yeah.
I've been listening to. I don't read because I just don't have time, but I can listen to stuff because I do a lot of cleaning. Right, it's great.
Welcome to my app.
And I got an audiobook by Pierre Novelli. Have you heard of Pierre Novelli? Great comedian, and he's just released an audiobook called Why Can't I Just Enjoy Things? Have you heard it?
No, is it good?
Oh, so good. It's so good. I love it.
Okay, I'll add it to my
He's
list.
basically sort of talking about his experience as an autistic and the things he finds difficult and explaining why he does it. But it's so funny and it's so clearly written from, this is why I'm so convinced of my perspective and why I do things the way that I do them, because I'm not just making shit up. This is just what I experience and what I'm dealing with. And he talks a lot about the double empathy problem. And the common misunderstanding, which is what you're kind of alluding to earlier, is that a lack of empathy is a failing of neurodivergence, that they're failing to understand and empathize with neurotypicals. And what's quite interesting is, again, something that Pierre Novelli talks about, is that studies have shown that autistics have the same level of emotional empathy as neurodivergents, but that it's the cognitive empathy that they have the difficulty with. It's the bit about interpreting the neurotypical cues that trigger that empathy, if you like. And one of the things he says is that if you have neurodivergent people talking to neurodivergent people, they show similar levels of empathy to neurotypical people talking to neurotypical people.
Yeah.
And he's saying that the issue, this isn't his theory, by the way, just to be clear. The double empathy theory was coined by Dr. Damien Milton in 2012. And I'll do the quote, which kind of explains what it is. It says, simply put, the theory of the double empathy problem suggests that when people with very different experiences of the world interact with one another, they will struggle to empathize with each other. So basically, it's a disconnect in understanding between neurodivergence and neurotypicals. So it's not a failing of the neurodivergence. Yes, neurodivergence might not interpret or respond to emotions in a given situation in a way that the neurotypical world would want them to or expects them to. But conversely, neurotypicals don't appreciate that neurodivergence would rather you just stop whinging about stuff, dial down the emotion and cut to the chase.
Get to the point, yeah.
Yeah. So Pierre Novelli gives a fantastic example of this. He's like, I used to have people around to my house when I was a kid, and my mum was always appalled because I'd go and get myself a drink and I wouldn't get them a drink. And she was like, seeing that as a lack of empathy. It's like, well, no, because if they want a drink, then they should just ask me for a drink. How am I supposed to know that they want a drink? He was like, do I need to ask them if they need to go to the toilet all the time as well, until they do? Do they want me to blink their eyelids for them? It's brilliant.
It's true.
Yeah.
We have that in our house. We've had a house guest over Christmas, and my son will go in the kitchen, get himself something to eat, come back, sit down. I'll be like, do we not get some crisps?
Right, but that's
And he'll be like, do you want crisps?
Exactly. What? Just ask.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. Well, you didn't tell me you wanted crisps. You saw me get up.
What he was saying is, like, if you ask for a drink, I will give you all the empathy in the world. I will give you my very last can of Coke. The problem is not that I'm not empathizing with the situation. It's that I don't know that you have the need of a drink.
I'm not a mind reader.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's like when people say, oh, well, you should just know. I don't have a freaking crystal ball.
Yeah.
How should I just know? Like, one of the things that my son always struggled with at school, when we were doing when he was studying like history or English and like inference, right? How do you think Anne Boleyn felt when Henry VIII decided he was going to cut her head off? And Theo would be like, How do I know? I'm not a Tudor queen. And I think that's valid.
No, it totally is. I had this with Jay when he was doing homework, with English homework, and he would similarly would get really annoyed, and there'd be whole questions he'd just leave out. I was like, why have you left this out? And then they say, what is Peter feeling in this situation? He's like,
how the bloody hell do I know?
I don't know. And I just started to kind of realise how unfair it is in English comprehension that you're asking, essentially ableist questions.
Genuinely, how the bloody hell do I know how you feel? Right?
Yeah.
And I can imagine, if I make an effort, I can imagine how you might feel in a certain situation. But then I also get the added difficulty of, as a neurodivergent person, the way that I show you that I know how you feel is I tell you about an experience I had when I felt how I think you are feeling.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is considered a bit rude.
No, it is, isn't it? And again, that's quite an ADHD trait, I think, as well. It's like, I knew that. So I'm going to say the same story as you. I'm not. And then people think, well, firstly, I've told that story.
But that's
it's not all about you.
Yeah, that's a way of neurodivergent people connecting, right?
Yes. So then we might be crying about splitting up with their boyfriend. They'd be like, oh yeah, I split up with my boyfriend when I was 12. It's like, how is that fucking relevant?
Because I'm showing you that I understand. I think I understand how you feel. I'm finding a place for connection.
Yeah.
But I don't have those. So the double empathy thing about, the basically the different languages of empathy that neurodivergent and neurotypical people speak. Yes. And I do find that kind of like that very clear, like them and us thing tricky, but let's go with it for the time being. Mm-hmm. I don't have any difficulty feeling, expressing, sharing empathy with my neurodivergent friends. Mm-hmm. And I have no problem with, I've got a very dear friend who, she's my most precious person. Mm-hmm. She can say to me, I'll message her and she could be like, mate, I'm having a shit day. I'm really sorry. I don't have room for this right now. And I'll be like, cool. And I'm not in the least bit offended. But someone who maybe is not neurodivergent says that to me, or who I don't know as well as her, I would be really I would be upset. Do you know what I mean? I think there's a thing about, because we speak the same language and we have the same terms of reference and we've built this friendship over years, where we just cut through the shit. I'm not looking for that must be awful.
Yeah.
Or let me help you fix that response. I'm looking for I hear you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I'm looking for an honest response.
This is a huge thing between Tam and I in our relationship. And we only realised it basically when it was too late, was the different ways that we needed, empathy to be displayed. I need empathy. So if I've had a shit day and I come in and I go, I've had a really shit day and I'm sharing whatever happened that day. What I really need is someone to sit with me in that moment and validate my feelings and go, man, yeah, they're a bunch of pricks. That must be really annoying. And Tam didn't do that because that's not how Tam perceives the world. So Tam would be just trying to fix it and basically looking at ways that I could solve it. And I'll get to that bit. I just want someone to sit with me in this bit and sort of, stroke my back and go, yeah, they're a bunch of pricks.
Really shit.
Yeah. And then I can go, right, now I've handled that. Now let's look at solving it.
That's also about knowing what people are good for as well, isn't it? I know it's different when it's an intimate partner, but I've got friends who are fixers, and if I need a solution, I can message them and go, "This has happened." They'll be like, "Right." Do you know what I mean? And I've got other friends who are soothers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was looking for Tam to be a soother, and Tam wasn't. And conversely, it worked the other way around as well. I remember once where quite early on in our relationship, we went out for dinner and Tam got their bike nicked. And we came back and the bike was gone and Tam got really upset by it. And I instinctively was like, give me a hug. I went to give them a hug.
She's like, call the police.
No, they literally pushed me away. I was like, what the fuck? I'm trying to make it better, right? Literally pushed me away. And I was really a bit kind of offended by that. But obviously, me and Tam have talked about it since. And they've sort of said I didn't want a hug. I wanted a bike. It's like, yeah, that's reasonable. But in that moment, I'm sort of responding in the way that I would want it. I'd want that empathy and that, like, just sit in this moment. And that's the double empathy problem in a nutshell, isn't it? Is that
No,
there's
it's that
different
thing of,
languages of what we need.
yeah, what book is it? Is it How to Win Friends and Influence People? One of those like
Mm-hmm.
wanky self-help books that says the mistake that we make is that we treat people how we would want to be treated, and what we need to do is treat people how they would want to be treated.
Yes, but then surely it takes empathy to understand how they want to be treated. And then
Or
it's a
just a
whole-
bit of freaking honesty. Just
Well,
tell
ask
me.
them.
Like,
yeah,
just
but
give
in
me
the
some
moment, you
instructions.
know, their bike's been nicked and they're upset about it. I'll be like, now, how do you want me to treat you here?
You know what, though? With my friend that I just mentioned,
Yeah.
we have this thing where one of us will message the other one and say, have you got any capacity to hold like this thing that I'm about to dump on you? Something just happened with a member of the family and I'm about to have a rant. And they'll be like, yeah, bring it on. Or I'll be like, bring it on. And then we'll almost immediately go, now what I need you to do is to tell me that I'm right and they're arseholes. Or what I need you to do
Okay,
is to help me work out what I'm going to do about it.
That's
Do
good.
you know what I mean? So
I think you said in the last episode about Theo once when a friend was sad and he was like, I can't remember what the
do you want a cup of tea?
Yeah.
A hug or a solution? Something like that. Like that's his thing.
It's like, but I love
gives you a
the
list of options.
Yeah, give me multiple choice. Tell me what you want me to be in this moment. Whereas I think that neurotypicals have the assumption that most people want the empathy in that emotional sense. But because neurodivergents are so wildly different in what they need and how they perceive things and how they interpret things.
Yes, absolutely. And maybe neurotypical people too, I don't know.
I'm not speaking on behalf of all
I don't
neurotypicals,
tend to
by
mix
the
with
way.
them as much as I can help it. But like
This is like an outreach program for you, Heidi.
I'm just, you know what I think about you, Mark.
Yeah,
you know,
I know.
that I think you're one of
you
ours.
think I'm on the cusp.
Yeah. So, as a neurodivergent person, particularly as a late identified neurodivergent person who has the benefit of being socialized as a neurotypical person.
Yeah. You know how we work.
Albeit a kooky one, right? Yeah. One of the gifts, and don't get me wrong, it's really tricky being neurodivergent, and I don't want to play that down, but one of the gifts of being a late identified neurodivergent person is that if you have the capacity and the resources, as part of that journey, you have to work out what actually is going on inside your own brain. Yes. And I don't think neurotypical people really have to do that very often. So I think that, someone dies maybe, right? Like you have a big crisis in your life and you have a big like, oh, what am I doing in my life moment? Or, so you have but generally speaking, I don't think that neurotypical people are challenged as much as neurodivergent people are to think about what is my brain doing? How is it different to other people? How do I make myself easier to be around?
Yes.
Right? Because regardless, I don't believe for a second, like even though those of us who are neurotypical who are not very social creatures, by definition, human beings are social creatures. Nobody wants to actually be and die alone. Like, I don't believe it, right? We might find other people very difficult, but ultimately we're social creatures, right?
Yes.
So when you are identified as having a social communication difference, like there's this thing of, right, so now your job is to work out what that means. And so I wonder whether actually the reason that empathy is so low on the presentation for many neurodivergent people is that we've just kind of bypassed that by the necessity of we have to work out what we need and we have to work out how to ask for it.
And advocate for yourselves. And
right.
Yes, yeah.
And so in amongst all of that, we haven't really got time for the luxury.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. No, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, it's really interesting because obviously I see things very differently in my household because I'm the emotion haver in our household. I think I'm the one that needs the empathy a lot of the time, and my kids aren't really old enough to tell me what they need at the moment. So I will, if Otto is in meltdown and he's crying and he's overwhelmed, my instinct is to give him a massive hug and go, it's going to be all right. He doesn't want that, but he does also, if I say, what do you want, which I do say now, to try and he doesn't know what he wants. He just doesn't want this, whatever this is. He just wants that to stop. And me giving a hug doesn't help. And similarly with India, when India's feeling incredibly frustrated and I try and give her a hug, it's not what she wants. Like, she will give me lots of hugs when she's regulated, but in that moment, very similar to Tam, is just going to push me away. It's like, just can't handle it. And as a neurotypical, as a parent, it's really hard for me to understand what to do in that situation.
Yeah.
Especially when they can't really tell me.
When they
you just
can't
have to sit by
verbally
them.
tell you.
You just have to sit by them. So it's great for you that Theo's like, this is what I need right now. And, you know.
Not always. Like, we went through periods. So, like, one of Theo's things, not so much now, but when he was in crisis, and it does happen occasionally, is that he does experience situational mutism. So when he's very, very stressed, he can't speak. So on those occasions, pure guesswork. But then I think you just get into a bit. I mean, he's older as well. He's 20 now, right?
Yeah.
So we've had time to work out the dynamics in our household, and I'm not getting it right every time by any stretch of the imagination. But I think, generally speaking, the older your children get, the easier that becomes, just in terms of the level of like self-awareness and
the experience, I guess, the lived experience of how you respond in certain situations. That's going to help.
But it's interesting because as a younger person, like in my late 20s, early 30s, right, I was a freaking wreck. I was like, I do have big feelings about all the feelings all the time, right? I have big feelings about everything all the time. And in my 20s and 30s, I was just a car crash. I was just like hurtling from one crisis to another. Like, my ADHD was in the driving seat for sure, right? And now I feel like as I've got a bit older, my autism is kind of more my autism. But, you know, the TISM is driving more than the ADHD is. The ADHD is in the back with the boot open, throwing shit out onto the motorway. No one notices. Like, it's just chaos. But, like, there was a big part of, because I didn't know I was neurodivergent and I was masking like mad, my mental health was significantly impacted by that. So I was constantly trying to fake these social norms, and it was, you know, really difficult for me. But I was also probably spending way too much time with people who didn't share my neurotype, and that was also having an impact on me.
Yeah, or people who didn't understand you because you didn't understand your neurotype.
Right.
So they didn't. So therefore they would say, you know, viewing you as a fucked neurotypical rather than a glorious neurodivergent.
Right. Or maybe they were the same. Maybe we had like a lovely connection, but we were both masked so heavily that we were just like, I mean, we're just drinking our way through it. That's why.
That helps, doesn't it?
You know, so but I do wonder if there's something about that as well, that, you know, like this research will never get commissioned because it wouldn't benefit anybody apart from neurodivergent people. So why would they do that? But I would be really interested to know the difference in the levels of displayed empathy between neurodivergent people who are new on their journey versus later diagnosed and identified neurodivergent people who have gone through that process of unpicking all of that shit and working out what's going on and then refiling it under, I'm not broken, I'm just neurodivergent. Because I think that there would be a difference. Like, masking plays a massive part in whether you're able to actually express what you're thinking and feeling confidently and safely around other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Pierre Novelli makes a really interesting point about neurodivergent masking as being the most extreme example of empathy from neurodivergence. Like, the very
Let me
fact
show you how like you I am.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I am so keen to not piss you off that I will engage in small talk and I will give you eye contact and I will not talk about my special interest because I think you're not going to be on board with it. That's the huge amount of empathy, which is not being displayed the other way around, because you don't get neurotypicals sort of going, I get that you want to talk to me about Lego for 4 hours, so let's just strap in and do it. It sort of seems one way. So it's a really interesting and very neuroaffirmative way of phrasing it and helping me see from the neurodivergent angle. I think it was it was really eye-opening. That whole, I haven't even finished it yet, but I'm
keen to read it. It sounds great.
It's really good. The audiobook is great because he's a comedian as well, so he delivers it really well as well. So one of the things you alluded to earlier is alexithymia and the role that alexithymia plays in empathy, which is really interesting. So this is something that I touched on in the Navigating Emotion episode of Neuroshambles. So if you don't know, listeners, what alexithymia is. Essentially, it's this inability to understand and interpret emotions, very often in yourself, but certainly in other people.
A disconnect between what's going on in your mind and your body and what you're actually interpreting mentally and
So you
cognitively.
know you're feeling a feeling, and you know that it makes you want to, respond to it, get out the house or whatever it is, but you don't know what that feeling is.
Yeah.
If you you don't know if that's fear or if it's excitement or that's the extreme version of it. Obviously, it's estimated apparently that up to 50% of autistics have some degree of alexithymia, but the theory is that it's a sliding scale. It's not just a on or off. It's a and again, this is something that we identified with Tam, is that they weren't able to have any level of emotional kind of introspection. So when I was like, what's going on, what's up, they wouldn't be able to tell me. And again,
would they be able to tell you a couple of days later after they'd had some time to think about it?
Maybe. What really did help was texting.
Yeah.
So I think a big part of the problem with Tam and I's communication, in terms of the empathy issue, was that my emotions were there, and the alexithymia was basically going, I know that there are big emotions, I don't know what they are, I don't know what I feel about them, and so there was a level of overwhelm. I mean, I'm trying not to speak on behalf of Tam, but this is something that I've sort of interpreted from it. So wouldn't be able to have those conversations, so would just shut them down. Mm-hmm. Whereas we learned that if I texted things to Tam, I was surprised at how quickly things came back in a very reasoned, very rational, very, very kind of expressive way. So obviously alexithymia has a big part to play with empathy.
We're big texters in our house. Big.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because again, you're taking out the emotion, right? You can text things that might trigger emotions, but you're not having to interpret other people's emotions or think about your own in the same way. I don't know. It was like this magic thing that happened when we started doing that. It's like, oh, we can have this conversation, just not face to face.
And I think that's also the thing with empathy, isn't it? Is that generally speaking, empathy is perceived as something that you vocalize, that you communicate verbally, right? Or that I think.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas, we have to understand that is not actually the primary method of communication of most people on this planet. It's the shortcut, but it's not it's not the only way that we communicate. And certainly if you are someone who experiences alexithymia, so my alexithymia is different to my son's, but his shows up as, particularly when overwhelmed, when he's in central nervous system overwhelmed. So his frontal cortex is offline, his brain is on fire, right? Mm-hmm. If you ask him in that moment, how do you feel? He couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
Right. He wouldn't even have the words. Mm-hmm. Because as well as alexithymia, you've got that interoception thing, right? So being able to identify where in your body you're feeling a thing, what that feeling means. So butterflies in the tummy, what does that actually mean? Interpreting that, making sense of that, then finding the word for that, then speaking the word for that. That's super complicated.
While your brain is already overwhelmed.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's no wonder that our kids in meltdown can't tell us what's going on. But equally, I think that one of the things with alexithymia that I think really plays into that misconception around empathy is that some of us, I have delayed emotional responses. So I can, and people will say to me all the time, oh, you're so confident. And I know that you can go into a courtroom and you can really, if you're advocating for a family, you can really tear the barrister a new one or whatever it might be, right? But then I will wake up at 3:00 in the morning sobbing.
Right. Okay. So you have delayed empathy.
I have delayed emotional responses to things. So it's almost like I have a thing where in the moment when I need to do the thing, it's not conscious, but my brain switches that part of my processing off so I can do the job. And then when it's dealt with, when I'm fast asleep, it'll be like, oh, by the way, there's all this stuff from earlier today that made you feel really uncomfortable. There you go.
Yeah, deal with it now. Well, now you're trying to sleep.
Right. But that is preferable to, calling the judge, see you next Tuesday.
And just getting overwhelmed in the moment.
Right?
Yeah.
So, for me, it's preferable.
Yeah.
But I think that when I was in I still am in therapy, but when I was in therapy and therapists would say to me, and where do you feel that in your body? I'd be like, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Also, why is that relevant?
Right. And then they want you to go, oh, I feel it in my chest and it feels like this. All that kind of therapy speak of it's the thing again, isn't it, of expecting you to be able to speak this
Yes.
neurotypical language.
Yeah.
And actually what you're interpreting is a neurodivergent experience. So, yeah, I think alexithymia plays a massive part in us as neurodivergent people appearing less empathetic, and
Yes.
in neurotypical people assuming we don't have empathy.
And not being naturally drawn to neurotypical empathetic responses, the ones that they would expect you to have.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, if you walk into a room and someone's having big feelings, and you're, like that pattern recognition thing, right?
Yeah.
If you walk into a room and someone's having big feelings, and on a cellular level, even if not cognitively, that if you stay in that room, that then at 3 o'clock in the morning you're going to wake up sobbing, you'll leave the room, right?
And everyone's like, rude.
So,
It's like self-preservation.
You won't know that in the moment. You'll just
okay. Rude. So you don't go, oh God, someone's off having a blub. I'm going. This is coming back to me in the morning and I can't deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's different for everyone, right? It's different for everyone. But I think there's a lot of privilege that goes with being able to access what you're feeling at any given moment in that moment.
Yeah, and I think there's from a neurotypical perspective, you get neurotypicals who fucking lean into other people's emotions as well. And I don't think it's all altruistic. I think there's a it's the drama.
Well, people love a fuss, don't they?
They do.
Ferrari.
Yeah, exactly. And again, maybe it's sort of demonstrative because like, look how much a part of this group I am. I have friends who just feel intense emotion for anyone, even like that someone's step grand died or something, and they're like they're feeling it at 100 miles an hour,
like the Princess Diana experience, right? Like that. I think
it was like a whole outing of neurotypicals, wasn't it?
I think that's the worst example of neurotypical empathy I've ever seen in my life. Don't get me wrong, amazing human being, a great loss, right? For lots of reasons. And it was almost like no one had ever lost anyone in their entire life.
Yeah, people lost their shit, didn't they?
It was really like, I remember being like, what the fuck is going on here?
There was like group hysteria, wasn't
it? Is that
it?
inappropriate to say that? It probably
no,
is.
It's not though, because I think again this is part of that empathy, or this display of empathy and this display of emotion being seen to tie yourself to the in group, right? That survival technique again of saying, look, I am also feeling this, so I'm like you, so we're part of this group of people.
We're the same. We are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, not all empathy and displays of empathy are like that. Just to be clear, I think. But
not everyone's like out in the street throwing flowers on passing cars just to show that they're feeling things.
No, but I think that sometimes there are mass events like that do genuinely trigger this empathetic response, which is.
I just remember being like, "Wow,
really." Wow, because you didn't seem to give much of a shit when she was alive.
I just thought it was a really strange phenomenon.
Yeah, it was.
And that is not to take anything away from people who genuinely had that experience. I just found it very strange.
But then where does empathy and grief sort of overlap?
Right. But then I guess there's that thing of when you go to a funeral, you have the memories of all the other funerals you've ever been to, and it makes it extra sad. So if you're at a funeral, see here, I do have empathy, right? Okay, here we go.
Okay, here we go.
Proof that I have empathy. Then you'll tell me it's not empathy. But anyway, when I go to a funeral, even if it's someone that I don't know very well, I do get very upset and overwhelmed. Okay. And the first funeral I ever went to was my mum's funeral when I was 19. And I think that's why.
Okay, so you're then, it's like echoes of
the
grief.
Pattern recognition.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But people are always like, oh, you seem very upset. I'm like, yeah, no, I don't even know his surname. How weird is that? Yeah. I think that people are incredibly complex creatures. Brains are going to brain, right? And our brains will find a way to do the things they want to do and they need to do. And I just think that we can't ever be sure that anyone else is experiencing the world in the same way that we are. We just can't. So maybe that's what empathy is there for, to make us feel like...
It's the shortcut, isn't it?
To make us feel like people are the same as us.
Yeah. I mean, it was quite interesting to bring it back to the kids and how to the extent that my kids show it. Sometimes they will try and fake empathy and it's just so jarring. Have you had that with Theo?
Like how? Give me an example.
So I don't know if you heard the episode where I talked about Jay stabbing an air tent. So that
No.
we went camping and he was having a horrible time and he was like absolute meltdown and he kind of the only way that he could get out of it is if the tent was
Died.
fucked basically.
Right.
So he stabbed the air tent and it fucking just deflated and I was very weirdly calm about it, but like mortified, and because I knew where it was coming from, and but I was really it was a very harrowing experience for me, and sort of sent him away, and he came back to me later on in the day, and I was sort of trying to explain to him why I was so kind of sad about it because I didn't think he really understood it, and I was like, look, India and Otto want to stay, right? And you want to go, and I want to stay because we're with my friends, and I haven't seen my friends in a long time, and and I don't get out very often. So, and I'm a solo parent now, so I can't look after everyone's needs at the same time, and that's why I feel sad. And he was really sweet, and he leaned over to me and he put his hand on my shoulder. Right, he's never done this before. He put his hand on my shoulder and he went, and he furrowed his brow very seriously and went, "I understand what you're saying." And it was like, and it was really awkward, and it wasn't natural, and it was quite funny, but I just understood the significance of what that was. The fact that he was trying to bridge that gap, that he was almost sort of masking because he sensed that that's what I needed at that time, was huge to me. Like it meant a lot to me, even though it was slightly ridiculous because he obviously didn't mean it.
Yeah, so Theo's not a big hugger. He'll hug me. He'll be physically like close to me, but he wears a badge all the time that says "I don't hug." Right?
Nice.
It's on his lanyard at uni. And if he meets someone or we spend some time with someone and we're getting to say goodbye, because I'm a hugger, and because I don't know, it's just what I've learned, and I don't know, I like a hug. Like when you were single parent.
Don't apologise for it. I love hugs.
I'm like, are you a hugger? Like, walking away slowly. But I always ask. I don't just like jump on people and stuff. But like if we've spent time with people and we're saying goodbye to people and they're my friends and we're hanging out with them, and I'll be like giving people hugs, and then you can see Theo like decide who he wants to hug and who he doesn't want to hug. And he'll say goodbye to the people he doesn't want to hug first, and then he'll hug the people he does want to hug. Now, to me, that is him realising that if he hugs other people and then doesn't hug you, you will feel rejected.
That's definitely empathy, isn't it? Because he's understanding that people will feel rejected by that. Yeah.
I don't want to be a dick about this. I'm not touching them, but I'll say goodbye to them first, right?
Yeah.
So, like, you would not necessarily think that, looking at that from the outside, you would think, oh, it's a bit strange. He's hugged half the people and not the other half. But for me, that's empathy. He's understanding that he would hurt someone's feelings potentially by hugging everyone else and then not hugging another person.
Yeah.
So it's not so much he's faking empathy, but he's kind of playing the social rules to make his expression of empathy okay.
On his terms, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Otto does this sometimes as well. Like he is empathetic. He does feel it when people are upset or hurt themselves sometimes. And so there was one time where Jay was just being awful to me and said something terrible to me, and he waited until Jay had stormed out of the room, and he saw that I was quite upset, and he came up to me and went, "I don't think you're the worst parent in the world, Daddy." And again, he gave me a stiff little hug. It wasn't like it was but and again, it's just like you've got they are empathetic.
He gets it.
They get it. They just don't. It's not natural. They're not very well practiced at it. Now, India has empathy, like I was talking earlier, but not for humans. For animals.
Yeah.
My God, she feels like. So we've got a cat. Now, our cat is either a brilliant hunter or a complete arsehole, depending on your view, right? Because he's brought in all kinds to our house, and he's brought in birds and frogs. He brought in a pigeon, like through the cat flap, a mole. Yeah, all of this, like it's not great. Yeah. But India is like off the charts emotional about it, and needs to save it. So shows enormous amount of empathy. At one point, she commandeered one of our best Tupperware boxes and wrote "bird rescue box" on it, so that if Loki brought in a bird, she could put it in there and keep it safe. And she'd like wake me up at like 4 a.m. once with this bird box going, "Loki's got another one, come and rescue it straight away." But if Otto's crying, she's like, "Shut up, stop crying." So, but for animals, she feels enormous empathy.
I think that's a really common experience for neurodivergent people, that they feel a greater affinity with animals than they do with human beings. Like I see that so often in families that I'm supporting.
And why is that, do you think?
I think
they're simpler.
Humans are complicated.
Yeah.
And not always very honest. And I think, because our first episode was about honesty, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
So I think that the honesty that you get with animals, like very clear communication. Horses, frig me, they're freaking magical. Like horses are just, I've never been a big fan of horses, but I spent some time with some horses not very long ago. And I was just amazed by like how they just pick up on your energy. Like, I know that sounds really woo, but like,
no, it's not. There's
unbelievable. Like, I think the thing is with animals, right? This is my theory. It's probably someone else's. I probably ripped it off. Don't say it's mine. But is that animals are experts in non-verbal communication, right? And I think that the thing that makes interhuman communication extra complicated is speech, because people say completely opposite to what they mean.
Yes,
quite often.
Yeah.
Whereas animals just show you what they mean.
Yeah, there is.
And I don't mean to like anthropomorphize them or whatever that.
No. There's a genuine theory that that a lot of animals show empathy. Like it's not just a human trait, empathy. Yeah. So elephants will grieve for the herd losing a baby elephant.
Yeah.
And gorillas as well. And dogs, of course. If a dog senses that its owner's upset, they will just not leave their side. You know, they'll try and make it better. I mean, that's like dogs have compassion as well. Right? It's fucking crazy.
My son Theo has an assistance dog, right? And he's a border terrier. His name is Bertie. Sometimes Bertie will be like unsettled, and Theo will be like, "I don't know what's wrong with him," and I'll be like, "Are you all right though?" And he'll be like, "Not really." Do you know what I mean?
Okay, wow.
It's like Bertie is like a barometer, an external barometer for Theo's internal workings, and sometimes he doesn't know.
Yeah,
what's going on. But Bertie will like
picks up on it,
do things that you're like, I can tell from how Bertie is whether Theo's dysregulated or not. Sometimes it is absolutely legendary, and Theo's attachment to those animals, to our dog and our cat and the tortoise, is much more significant than his attachment to me. When I took him back to uni the other day, "Are you going to miss me?" "Yes." "What are you going to miss the most about home?" "The cat." Okay.
Yeah, but he can talk to you on the phone, right?
Right? But when I'm on the phone to him, he makes me put the video on so he can see the cat.
Oh, okay. Don't take it personally. One of the interesting things I've kind of realised recently is that despite my kids not really finding it easy to show empathy in the way that neurotypicals would perceive empathy, they do need it.
Yes.
So this is something that I've touched on previously with Otto. When Jay used to hurt himself, you know, as a toddler and they're running around and they bang their knee or whatever, we always used to we didn't want to make a drama of it. We would always just sort of laugh it off and then go on. And he would just get up, brush himself down, and he'd run off. Be like, brilliant. We are smashing parenting. Now, Otto would do it and he'd fall over and we would do the same technique, right? We'd laugh and go, "Oh, you had a little bump. Come on, off we go." And he would be inconsolable. He could not get over it and then run off, right? And it took ages for us to realize that what he needed in that moment was validation that what he was feeling was valid, right? He needed the empathy. He needed us to go, "Oh, that must have really hurt." And it was like magic. As soon as he said that, sort of got down and went, "Oh, that must have really hurt. Oh, that would have hurt me as well." He instantly just switched to not feeling overwhelmed, understanding it, and it like sped up his recovery so much quicker than just trying to sort of invalidate his feelings and tell him to just run it off.
Yeah. Which is so important with neurodivergent kids, that we don't cry, don't make a fuss.
Yeah.
You know, we mustn't do that.
No.
Because robbing our children of their capacity to let those feelings out in whatever way that comes, and trying to keep them safe during the process really does set them up for, if you don't let them do that, it really does like encourage masking and make it increasingly difficult. You know, like I can remember when I was like, I don't know, about 8 or 9, and I swallowed a pen lid in class. Right. And you're not as old as me, but at the time there used to be these like, it was when the Bic biros.
It was before they got the hole in the end.
Before they got the hole in the end.
You're the reason that they put the hole in the end.
So they put the hole in the end so that people like me who chewed their pen lids wouldn't choke to death. But I swallowed one of these pen lids, and it was during the whole, we're now putting holes in the top of our lids. So I'd seen these like public information films about, you know, biros will now have a leg because if your child swallows a pen lid, they'll probably die. Right. I'm in class. I swallow a pen lid. I'm convinced I'm going to die. Right.
Okay.
I just remember like just the mist descending. And I think it was probably my first public meltdown.
Right.
And it was horrific. Right. On the back of that, until I moved from that school, I was referred to by all of my other classmates as pen top. Right. And
they're such dicks.
Kids assholes. So I remember like the teacher in the moment being like, don't make a fuss, just, you know, and they were obviously trying to calm me, but I was like off the wall, freaking out, thinking I was going to die. And and I feel like that is the moment when I learned it wasn't okay to respond with big feelings. Because
for you to respond with big feelings.
For me, because I got kind of like chastised and shamed by the teacher, and then I got called pen top for the next 3 years.
Yeah,
and I feel like that was the first moment where I was like, right, so masking that's the way it's going to be now.
Yeah, so as you're saying, that if we need to treat our neurodifferent kids with empathy and validate their feelings, what you're feeling now is real.
Because I thought I was dying, and someone needed to say to me, I know you think you're dying. I don't think you're dying. Let's take some deep breaths.
Yes, this must be quite scary for you.
You must be terrified. Yeah. It's okay. I'm going to sit with you until you feel less overwhelmed. Instead of stop making a fuss. You're holding everyone up. You're being silly now.
Yeah, because this is the thing with Otto is, again, validating those feelings. But sometimes I will say, I'm taking control now. I am now making the decisions. That also helps, I think. But yeah, it's a really interesting... You know, it's this gentle parenting thing, isn't it? Right? It's listening to them and validating what they're saying, and it's similar with Jay when he's overwhelmed and he's angry. I had this today actually, where he lost his shit at me because he just had a really tough day at school. You know, just going back to school now after the Christmas holidays, and he just had a really rough day. And
it's a lot, right?
Yeah, and he was about to just blow his top, and I stopped and I went, I understand this is too much for you at the moment. I understand that you're really cross. And again, just almost forcing him to look at his own feelings in that moment. So having that moment of empathy with him and going, I get this has been a really hard day for you. And I get that right now you're really overwhelmed and you're in the red zone. And what can we do to de-escalate this? And it did manage to de-escalate it. I mean, he did.
And especially in meltdown moments, like empathy is really key in those moments, but like hands off empathy, right? Like
I know, I get the hint. I want to give him a hug, man. One of the things you alluded to earlier.
Oh God, here we go. What did I say?
A lack of empathy looks bad to neurotypicals. It doesn't look great. So I've had situations where Jay has been playing with someone, he's hurt the kid is on the floor in tears, and Jay's just standing waiting. There's nothing. It looks terrible to the other parents. It looks like Jay's just decked this kid. It's not a good look. And because, as you're saying, people think that he's a cold-hearted maniac.
Right.
And he's not. I mean, maybe he's just showing the empathy that he himself would be.
He's just
just give me some time, right?
And trying to work out what to do. Yeah.
Just give me some time. I'll get over it, and then we'll come back online, right? I don't know how much thought was that. He was just waiting it out. I think, as he said himself, if someone gets shot in the knee, it's not my problem. I mean, in this instance, he was the person holding the shotgun, so it is.
But, you know, none of us are perfect, right? And I get cross about how we hold neurodivergent kids to so much higher a standard than we do neurotypical kids, and actually neurodivergent adults as well.
Mm-hmm.
We're expected to be on our very best behaviour all the time. And if we're not, it's because we're faulty. Do you know what I mean? And we do it to kids. I've seen it in schools, for example. I've been observing children in schools, and I know that the child that I'm observing, for example, is ADHD. And I see that they're in a line of kids waiting to go into a classroom, and a number of children are jiggling, and this child is one of them. But that child is the child that the teacher goes, stand still.
Yes.
Because the teacher knows that child is ADHD. So, like, we expect our children to be exemplary human beings all the time. Fact is, we've already alluded to it, kids are fucking assholes. So neurodivergent kids have the capacity for assholery also.
Yes.
And I wager that neurodivergent adults are just the same. People are assholes. Like,
I mean, it is frustrating when it is your kids showing no empathy to you or just not reading the situation. So we've had like a couple of times. Once Tam came downstairs and overnight there'd been a leak under the kitchen sink and it was the hot water tap. So there was hot water everywhere and everything was steamed up and it looked like an absolute fucking nightmare. And Tammy's standing in this puddle of water and Jay walks in, sees the situation and says, "Can I have some breakfast?" And it's like, you know, Tammy's obviously upset and panicking and overwhelmed and like, what the fuck? What do I do? How do you stop the hot water? Where's the hot water tap? You know, it's not on in the tap. So where's it coming from? All of that overwhelm's going on. And Jay's just like, where's my breakfast?
Yeah.
This complete lack of understanding and empathy for the situation. And it does look bad.
Yeah.
And I think there's another time where Tam told me that they fell down the stairs and phoned me up at the time. I was away and phoned me up at the time and was like really quite upset and said, "I've fallen down the stairs." I was like, "Okay, well, you know, are you all right?" And was like, "Yeah, I think I'm all right." But the kids literally just stepped over me. And Tam was really upset that the kids basically didn't give a fuck. They just walked around them and then, you know, just got on with their stuff. And so I think in that instance, Tam needed empathy and Tam knew that I would be the one to give the empathy, right? So called me on. It was like, I need this and I'm not getting it from any of the fuckers in here. So I'm going to call Mark.
Make some sad noises down the phone.
Yeah, which I did, obviously.
Yeah,
and I was like, "Oh, do you want me to come there?" Obviously not. You know, that wasn't why they phoned, but
I think my health wasn't so bad, hasn't been very good, and when I was very unwell, Theo really had to step into things that he hadn't before. Like he kind of became a young carer for a little while when I was really poorly. My mobility was really impacted and my chronic fatigue really flared. And he was basically at home with me all the time. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting to see how that played out because he did much more than he'd ever done. Right. Yeah. And he still does now much more than he's ever done. He messages me during the day. "Have you had a drink, Mum? Have you taken your meds? Have you had something to eat?" Right. Mm-hmm. And he does it because he knows that if he doesn't, I might forget. Right. And he never did that before. So he's really stepped into that role. And I know that from conversations I've had with friends who don't have neurodivergent kids, they think that he hasn't really done that much. Do you know what I mean? Okay. So, like, I think that we have to really check ourselves over our expectations of our children and we have to meet them where they're at, right? And I sometimes have conversations with parents where they're like, "It's really hard because my child doesn't show me that they love me." Mm-hmm. And like, I get that. It's hard when you are having a moment. I have had it with Theo and I'm just like, "You are a selfish little asshole. Like, I'm really upset and you're just not paying any attention and you are asking me for a biscuit," for example. Like, yeah. Equally, I'm not doing myself any favors by thinking that is an indication that he doesn't feel a connection with me. I have to find the way to see the way that he does feel a connection with me. And he does express that.
Because it is there and you understand it. So right? this is the thing with Jay, is that he wouldn't show. If I'm ill, he's the worst. Right. He's just so bad. Like, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't care for me. So him as I've talked about in a previous episode, him sharing his special interest is the thing, right? The thing that's precious, and he's sharing it with me. That's the affection there. It's just I'm not going to get it in conventional means. And
that's the connection, right? And like with Theo, like him, things that he does for me, which I mean, maybe we'll touch on this a bit, but like the little things that don't seem like a big deal. And other people think, well, of course he should do that. He's 20 years old. But what they don't know or don't remember is that for 2 years, he didn't leave his bedroom. So the fact that he is able to remember at university, for God's sake, to text his mum and say, have you taken your medication? That's a big deal.
That's huge. Yeah, of course. Yeah. And it's accepting that.
Right. So
that empathy definitely is there.
Meeting them where they're at, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, that's amazing. Yeah, I think I said to India as well, because I've been really ill over Christmas.
Oh.
It's been really annoying. Like, I was like, I'm going to take a month off Neuroshambles just to give myself a break and get through Christmas. And then I was just fucking completely wiped out.
And your body was like, oh.
Yeah, it was like, oh.
An opportunity here.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been riddled with a rolling grot for ages. And at one point, I went into the living room and I just went, oh, I just feel really ill. And India went, you've mentioned that 500 times. I've been keeping count. It's like, all right, I'll go to a different room, get some empathy there. I've got no one. I've got no one in this house that gives me any empathy that in the way that I need it. That's hard, I think, as a little floating neurotypical, alleged neurotypical in a sea of neurodivergency. You know what we need? Some kind of empathy hotline. So that I could just phone up and go, look, here's the thing, and then that must be really awful. That must feel really. That's basically what therapy is, isn't it? Isn't that what my therapist's for?
I think though as well, like it is difficult because you're solo parenting and I'm solo parenting. When the only other humans in the house are small humans, having children. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get your emotional needs met. Like, that's not the deal, right?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I wasn't getting them met when Tam was in the house either.
Right.
So.
Well, yes, same, X for a reason. But also, I do think that we have to be honest with ourselves about that. We're going to have to find another way for that need to be met.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what are we doing? Making these crazy, like, enmeshed codependent relationships.
Yeah, well, and I am getting better at that now. Actually, that's good. You know, I do have friends, like you were saying, finding the friends that are gonna, hold that space for you, that are gonna be able to listen to you, kind of needing that empathy and give you that empathy. And
I think it's really important that we are able to be honest with ourselves about when our needs aren't getting met.
It's not all rubbish.
Okay, so we're going to look at the positives now. So I think we've safely put to bed the theory that neurodivergents don't feel empathy.
Yeah, it's bullshit. Right.
It is, essentially. So now
And we could have saved ourselves a good hour if you'd just gone, yeah, you're right, Heidi.
You're back in the original episode we discussed. just if I believed you.
That's not what podcasts are about, right?
No, but I think it's interesting to look at, because it's really made me reflect on so many things and understand a lot more about empathy and how my kids perceive and interpret empathy.
It was helpful for me too. It made me challenge, because I've been saying that forever. Like, not forever, but when you were like, what did you mean by that? I thought, well, I know what I meant originally, but I'm going to have to really work out what I mean by that, because it's a bit of a shortcut.
Yeah.
Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about something more interesting.
Yeah. But actually, it turns out this is interesting. It's so much more nuanced than I think I kind of initially understood. And if we're looking at the positives, firstly, the positive is that when neurodivergents talk to neurodivergents, they show the same level of empathy as neurotypicals talking to neurotypicals, which is really interesting because they just talk in the same language, essentially.
And thank God that that's true, because it can be really isolating being neurodivergent. And when you find your other people who speak the same language and the same terms of reference as you do, my God, it's so affirming. So yeah, thank God that's true.
So that's a huge positive. Another one is that actually having a lack of emotional empathy in certain situations is absolutely needed. In a crisis, right? Like, this is why they say that neurodivergents in a crisis are amazing, because they cut out the fucking drama and the emotion. Like, right, what's needed right now? Because if someone's been shot and they're on the floor in Jay's situation, no one needs you getting down on the floor and someone going, oh, that must really hurt. I really understand
I,
that, you know.
I couldn't do my job if I had high levels,
Yeah.
permanently high levels of cognitive and emotional empathy switched on all the time.
Yeah.
I would be an absolute wreck. I couldn't do my job.
Because you'd be taking on everyone else's shit, right?
Doesn't mean I don't care. Doesn't
No,
mean I'm
absolutely.
not capable of empathy. But yeah, there's power in being able to tap into it and tap out of it.
Yeah.
If that is even a cognitive thing. I don't know if it is a thing that I do consciously, but I definitely do have that capacity.
Yeah, and certain jobs would need that, but a huge amount of jobs, I'm sure, absolutely don't want you to be like that, you know?
I know, I'd have a terrible bedside manner if I was a doctor, or I'd be an awful social worker.
Well, that's just know your lane.
Yeah, right.
Stay in your lane.
Right.
You know, prison guard.
Yeah. I did go out with a prison guard, though. He did not have any empathy, but that was not because he was autistic. He was an arsehole.
Oh, okay. That's a fine line. It's such a fine line. So there are positives, I think, is the upshot of this. And actually, it's just understanding how different people respond in different situations and have different emotional and empathetic needs.
Neurodiversity champions.
Okay, so we got neurodiversity champions now. Heidi, do you have any neurodiversity champions for us?
Oh, I have, and it's one that I've been waiting to talk about for a long time.
Okay, good.
Because a friend of mine has written a book under a pseudonym.
Right.
Her pseudonym is Charlotte Gale. And her book is out at the end of January, and it's called I Didn't See You There. And it's a book of poetry and prose, most of which was written sat outside the bathroom on her phone, because she has a young person in her home who is in extreme crisis and has OCD and is autistic. She has 2 young people in her home. And when I wrote my book, she gave me a poem to publish in the book, which I absolutely adored. And then since then, she's continued writing. So she's written this book. It's called I Didn't See You There. And it's a collection of poetry, but there's also little snippets, which you will love. There's like little bits in the middle of the text where they're just hilarious things that her kids have said.
Nice.
It's a bit like there's 2 lovely poems, and then on the page in between it just says in great big text with like quotation marks, massive vagina. And then it's just beautiful, right? And it's a really lovely collection of poems. And I have never felt so seen reading someone else's poetry.
Okay. Amazing.
It really captures like the challenge of raising neurodivergent kids, the challenge of worrying about a neurodivergent child with mental health challenges, the challenges of your own mental health as a parent, but also the hilarity of living in a house that does things differently.
But also, I guess, knowing that it was written when they were kind of sitting outside the bathroom in those moments of crisis and just trying to kind of sow some seeds of positivity and light in the
and also just filling the time whilst their young person was in the bathroom doing their rituals. So so it's a beautiful, they've been a great friend to me as well, but I just love that they've captured this snapshot of their lives and that they've been able to really, not that you have to do something productive with trauma, you don't. It's okay to just have trauma.
Yes, yeah.
But also that I just think there's so much value in what they've written. So the book is called I Didn't See You There, and it's by Charlotte Gale, and I'll be shouting about it all over my socials.
And that's out at the end of January?
The end of January.
Okay, it's not available for sale now, but I'll make sure I update the link so that when it's out, people can get to it.
And also, I think it's just really important that we support other neurodivergent parents with their creative endeavours.
Yeah, totally.
It's hard to be making things when you're in the mire of it.
It really fucking is.
Right? You know this. So I would really like to see people get behind the book and support Charlotte and buy her poetry.
Yeah, great. No, thanks. That's a good shout. I've got a neurodiversity champion, and this is something that isn't actually new at all. Yours is really current. Mine's actually quite old, but I've only just found out about it. Is that did you know that Sesame Street introduced an autistic character? I
mean, Sesame Street is as autistic as fuck, anyway.
There's all kinds of different neurotypes that play there.
Yeah. I think I remember seeing something about this, back end of last year, right?
But this was back in 2017. But obviously, I haven't been watching Sesame Street for a long time because my kids don't like the Muppets or
what?
that. Yeah, I tried And
I think you should sell them and get new children.
I think I've tried too hard, and now it's like, PDA has kicked in, and it's never gonna settle. But yeah, I saw a clip of it recently on the socials, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. And it's there's a character in it called Julia. She's autistic and non-verbal, and they explain why she doesn't respond to people calling her name, and why she's stimming, and why she doesn't talk. And it's like just open and like so compassionately done, and so sort of clearly done, because it's for kids, obviously. And it was just like, I just watched it and it was like, oh man, that was wonderful. And I think so. Shout out to Sesame Street for that.
Big up to Sesame Street.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes to that clip if I can find it as well.
Tiny epic wins.
Tiny epic wins now, which are the moments where parents of neurotypical kids would probably just shrug and move on with their day, but the moments where we're just like, oh, that's amazing. It's a massive epic win for people in our situation. So have you got any tiny epic wins, Heidi?
I feel like we've had like pretty big epic wins in the past 6 months, because, like Theo's now gone to university, which we just never thought would happen. Mm-hmm. But over Christmas, he was home for Christmas and New Year, and I took him back yesterday. And yesterday morning, I knew that we had to get up early, and they had to pack, and because they didn't do the pre-packing thing. They waited until the morning to pack. And I knew that he had to pack, and he had to walk the dog, and he had to clean out the tortoise, and there was lots of things that had to be done before he left. And my alarm went off, and I was just lounging about in bed, scrolling the socials, and a WhatsApp popped up, and it said, "Your breakfast is ready." And he'd made me breakfast.
Oh,
which
that's amazing.
I mean, it wasn't like, don't get me wrong, it wasn't a full spread, but it was a bacon sandwich and a cup of tea.
That's incredible.
Other people might not think that's a big deal, but I mean, I think it is a big deal. If a teenage boy makes you breakfast, I think that's a big deal. But yeah, like the fact that in amongst all of the craziness of everything, he had a moment when he thought, I'll make my mum some breakfast. I thought that was really sweet.
Yeah, that's really sweet.
Pretty big.
Yeah, that is a nice one. I've got a tiny epic win. Well, Christmas. Just getting through Christmas.
Oh, God.
I think everyone listening to Neuroshambles should permit themselves a tiny epic win if you got through Christmas and you're still here.
If you still know your name.
If you're still listening to this, because it's full on. It's been pretty overwhelming. But I think we navigated it pretty well. Like Christmas Day was, there was a lot going on, and at various points, both Jay and India said, it's a bit much. It's been a bit much today, which I get. But then we just had basically 2 days of staying in the house and just re-regulating and just being in our own space. And then we were a lot more sociable after that. And it was like, I think we navigated our way through Christmas in a tolerable way. And I'll take that, we did it our own way and it worked. And
you know what else as well, though? I think we sometimes forget that the fact that we've got neurodivergent children who can articulate, this is a lot for me.
Mm.
Like, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it
right?
Is.
Like, having kids who know that about themselves and feel safe to say that will set them up well for adulthood. Do you know what I mean? Like, because being from the generation that I was, that you just didn't speak up when you felt uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You will kiss grandma, all that stuff. That's a win too, right? That you've got kids who can go, oof.
It is, yeah. I mean, it was at the end of the day once it had all happened. But even so, they are, advocating for themselves. And it also meant that I could then say, well, tomorrow we're going nowhere. We're staying here and we're going to hang out and we'll play with your new stuff. And, we're just going to hang out. And that was a win. I think we all got through it. We all got through it well, I think.
Unscathed. Even without the Muppet Christmas Carol. I mean, I'm impressed. I don't know.
I'm gutted. But
I don't know how you would do Christmas without Muppet Christmas Carol.
They're not on board with it.
Wow.
Gonna have to watch it on my own.
We'll have a watch party next week.
Yeah, totally. I'm up for that. I'm definitely up for that.
What the flip?
Okay, some what the flip moments now. These are the moments where, as a parent of neurodivergent kids, they will say or do something that will completely confound you. And I get regular moments with my kids. One was Jay, where just from nowhere came, sometimes they just say something that makes them sound really fucking old.
Yes.
So Jay came out with, back in my day, they used to have loads of cafes outside. Back in my day, you're 11. fuck's sake. It was just like, where was this world where it was just like littered with cafes outside? I
I've
mean,
got visions of him outside on a Parisian pavement with a cigarette holder and a beret.
and a moustache. He would always have a moustache. He really wants a moustache. Yeah, totally. That would definitely fit. I got one from India as well. The other day, she went, "These potatoes are disgusting, but I know you can turn it around next time." It's like, great. That was like a massive criticism, and she still has faith in me. It's uplifting at the same time.
That's amazing.
This What the Flip moment is one that Jay said to me, and I was waiting for the right episode to talk about it, but I think it fits in with this one because it's about the complete lack of empathy and a lack of understanding of how what he says is going to be perceived. Right. Once I was sitting there, and he went, "I love you," and I was like, "Did you mean that, Jay?" And he went, "No." And I went, "Too late. You can't take it back now." And then he said, "Someone sounds like they're desperate for affection. Is that why Mummy broke up with you?" And I was just like, fucking hell. This is like, he obviously has no idea.
Wait, you're like, hello, is that the empathy hotline?
Yeah, that's when I'd need it. Yeah.
Oh my
No,
God.
it was one of those ones. It was like, just to be clear, it was the separation was mutual, but his his perception
Brutal,
of it, his
Brutal.
perception of it was that
Wow.
I was just too emotionally needy, which is probably true.
Wow.
In my household, but fucking hell, that was one that cut deep.
Yeah. He said to me not very long ago, "I think my dad thinks you've got Munchausen by proxy," and then just walked off.
Just drop that on the room. And then me. Okay.
Did I tell you last time about the pole dancing?
No.
This was a What the Flip from when he was much younger.
Okay.
He would have been about 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to go to Cubs in the local church hall, and the church hall was closed for the election. Like it was like a polling station.
Yeah.
And I used to work in cabaret, and I used to work with burlesque performers and pole performers, and like a lot of the people that I hung out with were strippers.
Okay.
And so he knew lots of people who were in that world. And we had a friend who was a pole dancer, and she is an incredible pole dancer. But we used to just hang out with them. And, like, I didn't take him to shows. That wouldn't have been appropriate. But he knew that I had friends who worked in that field.
Mm-hmm.
So we go to Scouts, Cubs, and outside there's a big sign, the big white sign with the big black letters that says polling station.
Yeah.
You can see where this is going. And we're waiting to go in. And he says, "Oh, Mum, is this where," insert name of my friend, "does pole dancing?" And I'm like, no. And he goes, "It says polling station. I thought it might be like so-and-so does pole dancing." And I go to the mums, "Oh, he doesn't know what that is, really." He goes, I do. She does it in a bra and knickers, and then she takes the bra off.
Oh, man.
And when you're like, I'm trying to like appear respectable.
Yeah.
I'm on the PTA.
They're like,
no one knows I move in these circles. I'm not ashamed. But equally, we just moved to the area.
We'd quite like to not involve social services
right.
this
And
early
I
on,
kind
right?
of was like, and it was the first time when I thought, oh, I might need to have a conversation with him about inside conversation.
Okay, so that is it for this episode of Neuroshambles. Firstly, Heidi, thank you so much for coming back and lifting the lid on empathy and all its myriad forms. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me. Sorry about all the swears.
No,
it's a heavy edit, isn't it?
No. I like leave the swears in. They're authentic. They're authentically you. I'm not going to cancel you, Heidi. I also want to say a massive thank you to the audience for listening. Thanks for coming back and for bearing with me during my my hiatus over Christmas and the New Year. Please check us out on the socials. We are on Instagram and Facebook and Threads and TikTok now. I'm doing a fair amount of TikTok stuff as well, which is very different to anything else. I thought I'd just release some sort of clips from the shows and put it on there and it would like go viral. No one gives a shit about the podcast clips. They just want me talking about my crazy Christmas trees and just shit that's happening to me in my daily life. So I'm over there doing that at the moment.
Well, they want me trying on an all-in-one thing that I decided to wear under a dress without a bra on. 42,000 views that has had. It's just people telling me to put a bra on, basically, in the comments.
It's all engagement.
So if you want to find me on TikTok, then you're welcome in advance.
Check us out on the socials, and also if you want to leave a review for the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please do, and that would always be gratefully received. That's it, I think, for this episode. Thank you so much for being here, and all that remains for me to say is have a nice life.